Title: I Crash Landed on a Medieval World and Meet a Foxgirl Warrior Part 2. Adventuring in a medieval with a Foxgirl Warrior. 1 month after the dragon's fall, the world felt different. Not healed. Not safe. But reset. Edward Grey had spent most of that time thinking, not about what he had killed, but about what the dragon had been doing before it died. It hadn't just been a threat. It had been a boundary. A living pressure that kept lesser monsters away simply by existing. Until it decided to expand instead. That realization stayed with him longer than the battle itself. One night, while the village slept, Edward stood alone inside the ship's workshop. Lights dim. Systems quiet. Only thought remained. So it wasn't just a predator, he muttered. It was a gatekeeper. Silence followed. Then, a spark. Not magic. Not instinct. Calculation meeting necessity. He turned slightly toward Lucy. We need a new kind of gate. Clarify. Edward exhaled. One that doesn't die. Over the following days, the printer worked continuously. 8 massive frames took shape. Each 12 feet tall. Each designed after the village's 4 elder couples. 2 human. 2 vulpine. 2 lupin. 2 feline. Male and female counterparts for each. Not idols. Not gods. But protective reflections of the village itself. Edward refined every system carefully. Movement speed enhanced. Strength scaling reinforced. Defense systems integrated. And hidden within each frame. Light-based weapon arrays capable of extreme precision if ever activated. When they stood completed, Edward simply said, "That's enough." Yuki noticed the changes first. Her shield had been modified without damage to its identity, only improvement. Now, a controlled impact system allowed a shield bash strong enough to launch multiple humanoid targets backward in a concussive wave. Her sword had also changed. A refined edge system now emitted a soft blue glow, not a beam, not a projection, but a reinforced cutting field that made the blade capable of slicing through nearly anything it touched. She tested it once, then stared at Edward. You made this unfair. Edward only shrugged. Everything here is unfair. His own creation came last. A collapsible staff, compact as a baton until activated. With a click, it extended to 6 feet in a single smooth motion. No strain. No resistance. Just intent becoming shape. But its true design was simple and absolute. Whatever it struck would receive multiplied force, impact concentrated far beyond physical expectation, while internal dampeners prevented recoil damage to the user. Yuki watched him test it once. That looks like a mistake waiting to happen. Edward gave a faint smirk. Only if I miss. Over time, something else changed quietly. Edward and Yuki became inseparable without ever naming it. Training together. Walking together. Arguing over small things that didn't matter. Standing too close for it to still be accidental. Neither of them spoke about it directly. But neither of them stepped away either. A week later, the outer wall finally set. Built from Edward's mixture and structural formulas, it hardened into something far beyond normal stonework. 4 massive gates faced outward, north, south, east, and west. Each reinforced with steel mechanisms that could hold against siege or beast alike. The village was no longer exposed. It was defined. That evening, Edward found Yuki near the edge of the settlement. She was watching the wall. Thinking. He stepped beside her. We don't have to stay here anymore. She glanced at him. Because of your 8 walking nightmares? Edward exhaled lightly. Because they work. A pause. Then he added. And because I think we're ready to move. Yuki didn't answer immediately. Then she turned toward him fully. You're asking me? Edward nodded once. Do you want to go adventuring? A beat. Then she smiled. Yes. Simple. Certain. No hesitation. She crossed her arms slightly. But we start with something simple. Edward tilted his head. Simple? Yuki nodded toward the horizon. East. A pause. We go east first. Edward looked out in that direction. Unknown land. Unwritten path. Then he nodded. East it is. Behind them, the village remained stable. The sentinels stood waiting in silence. And ahead of them, the world stretched further than either of them had yet traveled. Yuki stepped closer without thinking. Try not to make the entire continent afraid of you this time. Edward gave a faint smirk. No promises. She laughed softly. And together, they began walking forward again. The village was already awake when Edward and Yuki arrived at the ship. Not loudly. Just aware. Word had spread quickly. They were leaving. Not fleeing. Not exiled. Choosing to go. Yuki adjusted her gear while Edward walked up the ship ramp without hesitation. One last adjustment, he muttered. Lucy responded immediately. Specify. Edward glanced toward the mechanical horses stored in the exterior bay. Synthetic hide overlay. Organic visual patterning. Non-threatening profile. A pause. Purpose? Edward exhaled slightly. So people don't assume they're about to get trampled by something unnatural. Yuki raised an eyebrow from behind him. You mean you don't want your terrifying death machines to look terrifying? Edward nodded. Correct. The fabrication systems activated briefly. One horse. White overlay applied. Smooth, clean, almost noble in appearance. The second. Black, sleek, slightly more rugged in tone. Still mechanical beneath. But no longer alien at first glance. Yuki stepped closer to hers. Oh. A pause. That's actually thoughtful. Edward shrugged. It's efficient. She smirked. Liar. 3. Departure. By midday, everything was ready. The sentinels remained behind at the village perimeter. Silent guardians. Watching. The gates opened. Not to let danger in, but to let them out. Edward mounted his black horse. Yuki swung up onto the white one with practiced ease. She looked over at him. East, right? Edward nodded. East. A pause. Then he added. No detours into dragon-sized problems. Yuki laughed softly. No promises. At first, the journey was quiet. The land outside the village was still shaped by old fear patterns, paths that avoided certain regions, settlements spaced cautiously apart. But now, the dragon was gone, and the world hadn't yet adjusted. Yuki rode slightly ahead at times, testing speed, laughing when the mechanical horse responded perfectly. This is unfairly fun, Edward called back. That seems to be a theme. By late afternoon, they saw smoke on the horizon. Not wild. Controlled. Villages. Yuki slowed. That's new. Edward studied it. Not in our records. A pause. We're off the map. Yuki glanced at him. That doesn't concern you? Edward shook his head slightly. It interests me. That earned a look from her. That's worse. They reached the outskirts of a small settlement by evening. Simple walls. Wooden structures reinforced with stone. Guard posts at the edge, poorly maintained, but functional. And people. Lots of them. The moment Edward and Yuki appeared on horseback, the atmosphere changed. Not hostile. Not welcoming. Uncertain. A guard stepped forward, spear held loosely. State your purpose. Yuki opened her mouth. But Edward spoke first. Travelers. A pause. Passing east. The guard's eyes moved to the horses. White. Black. Strange, but not threatening any more thanks to their appearance. Still, something about Edward made people uneasy. Not fear. Awareness. A second guard approached. Older. Wiser. You're not from around here. Edward nodded. Correct. The man studied them longer. Then finally. We don't get travelers on this road anymore. Yuki tilted her head slightly. Why not? A pause. Then the guard answered quietly. Because things have been moving again. Edward's expression changed slightly. Just enough to notice. Moving? The guard nodded once. Things that used to stay away. Silence followed. Yuki glanced at Edward. He didn't speak immediately, but his focus sharpened. Edward finally asked, "How far east?" The guard hesitated, then pointed. "Past the broken ridge." A pause. "No one's come back from there in weeks." Yuki leaned slightly toward Edward. "That sounds like your kind of problem." Edward exhaled slowly. "Yeah." A beat. Then quietly. "It does." They didn't stay long. The village gave them supplies without argument. Not trust. Not fear. Something closer to relief that someone else was going further. As they left, Yuki rode beside Edward again. "So that's it?" Edward glanced at her. "That's what? First civilization outside your village and we're just passing through?" Edward looked ahead. "We're not here to stay." A pause. "We're here to see what changed." Yuki smiled slightly. "And fix it?" Edward smirked faintly. "If needed." The settlement faded behind them. The road narrowed. The land shifted. Less maintained. More wild. And further east. Something unseen was already waiting. Yuki leaned forward slightly on her horse. "I like this part." Edward looked over. "Which part?" She grinned. "The part where we don't know what's coming." A pause. Then Edward answered simply, "Good." And they continued east. Night came quietly. The road had long since faded into little more than a direction. East. Always east. Edward set up camp with practiced efficiency while Yuki handled the mounts, brushing a hand along the white-coated horse's neck. "Still can't believe these fly," she muttered. Edward glanced over. "You say that every time." She smirked. "Because it's still ridiculous." The fire crackled softly between them. No village. No walls. No sentinels. Just open land and distant silhouettes of rising terrain ahead. Yuki leaned back slightly, looking toward the dark outline on the horizon. "That's the ridge, right?" Edward nodded. "Broken ridge." A pause. "That's where things start getting strange." She glanced at him. "Stranger than flying horses and dragon armor?" He didn't answer that. Instead, he reached into one of the saddlebags. Edward pulled out a reinforced box. Set it beside her. "This is for you." Yuki blinked. "That tone makes me nervous." He nudged it slightly toward her. "Open it." She gave him a look. Then slowly lifted the lid. And went still. Inside. A full set of dragon scale armor. Not black like his. Not dark like Ven's. Silver. Clean. Elegant. With subtle gold detailing worked into the edges and joints. Light caught it even in firelight. It looked less like armor. And more like something meant to be worn proudly. Yuki stared at it. "Edward." Her voice softened slightly. "You made this?" He nodded once. "Same base as mine." A pause. "Reinforced." She looked up at him. "Why?" Edward didn't look away this time. "Because I don't want to see you get hurt like that again." A quiet beat. "Or worse." Yuki's expression shifted. The teasing wasn't gone. But something deeper pushed through it. "You really think that'll stop me from getting into trouble?" Edward gave a faint smirk. "No." A pause. "But it'll help you survive it." She closed the box slowly. Then stood. Holding it carefully. "You're bad at this." Edward raised an eyebrow. "At what?" She looked at him directly. "At pretending this doesn't mean something." A small pause. Then she smiled, soft but real. "Thank you." Two small tents were set up side by side. Close enough to talk. Separate enough to pretend they weren't already past that point. Yuki stopped at hers and turned slightly. "All right." She lifted the box slightly. "New armor test." Edward nodded. "Good idea." She smirked. Then added casually. And no peeking. Edward blinked once. Wasn't planning on it. She gave him a look. That didn't sound convincing. He shrugged. I value my continued survival. That earned a quiet laugh from her before she stepped inside. Inside his own tent, Edward pulled on his black dragon scale armor again. The familiar weight settled naturally across his body. Not heavy. Not restrictive. Just ready. He paused for a moment, thinking, then finished securing the last piece. When Yuki stepped out, Edward actually paused. Just slightly. The silver armor fit her perfectly. Gold accents catching the firelight. Balanced between warrior and something far more striking. Yuki noticed the pause immediately. What? Edward shook his head once. Nothing. A beat. It fits. She narrowed her eyes. That's it. He smirked faintly. You want a longer answer? She crossed her arms. Yes. He looked at her again. Then said simply, You look good in it. That was enough. Her ears flicked slightly. Better. By morning they were moving again. The land changed quickly. Trees thinned. Stone rose. The ground fractured into uneven paths and broken slopes. The broken ridge lived up to its name. Sharp formations. Collapsed rock faces. Old scars across the land that didn't look natural. Yuki slowed slightly. This place feels. She trailed off. Edward finished it quietly. Wrong. They dismounted near a narrow pass. The air felt still. Too still. Edward crouched briefly, examining the ground. Tracks. Yuki moved closer. Monsters? He shook his head. Not exactly. A pause. Organized movement. She frowned. You mean something's guiding them? Edward stood slowly. Or something they're following. Beyond the pass, stone structures became visible. Not buildings. Not fully. Fragments. Half buried. Collapsed. But clearly not natural. Yuki's voice lowered slightly. Those aren't from any village. Edward nodded. No. A pause. This is older. Final beat. They stood at the edge of the broken ridge. Behind them, a world they had helped stabilize. Ahead, something unfinished. Something waiting. Yuki adjusted her grip on her newly forged blade. You always find the interesting paths, don't you? Edward glanced at her. You said you wanted adventure? She smirked slightly. Yeah. A pause. I didn't say I wanted easy. Edward gave a faint grin. Good. And together, they stepped into the ruins. The ruins didn't make noise. That was the problem. No wind through stone. No animals. No distant movement. Just stillness that felt watched. Yuki slowed slightly, her hand resting near the hilt of her newly upgraded blade. We're not alone. Edward didn't stop walking. No. A pause. We've been followed for about 5 minutes. Yuki's ears flicked. And you didn't say anything? He shrugged lightly. I was waiting to see if they'd get closer. They reached a narrow pass between broken stone. That's when it happened. Movement. Fast. 20 figures dropped from ledges, stepped from behind ruins, and emerged from shadowed gaps. Various species. Lupin. Feline. Human. Even a few reptilian types. All armed. All confident. They formed a loose circle around Edward and Yuki. One stepped forward. Scarred. Smiling. Predatory. Well now. His eyes ran over their armor, their weapons, the horses. That's some very nice gear you've got. A few others chuckled. Another added. Yeah, real nice. A pause. We'll be taking that. The leader tilted his head slightly. Armor like that, weapons like those. A grin spread wider. We'll sell it for a very high price. Another voice from behind. If you hand it over nice and easy. A beat. We might make it quick. Silence followed. They expected fear. Panic. Negotiation. Yuki glanced at Edward. Not worried. Just mildly annoyed. Can I? Edward didn't even look at her. Try not to break the terrain too much. She smirked. No promises. One of the rogues lunged first. Fast. Confident. Dead wrong. Yuki moved. Her shield came up. And slammed forward. The impact burst outward in a concussive wave. 5 attackers were thrown backward instantly, lifted off their feet and hurled 10 feet across broken stone. They hit hard. Didn't get back up. The circle faltered. Just slightly. Not fear. But confusion. What? That was all one managed to say. Yuki followed through. Her blade ignited with a faint blue glow along the edge. She stepped into the next attacker. One clean strike. Weapon gone. Armor split. Opponent down before they even understood what happened. She didn't stop moving. Didn't overextend. Just precise. Edward waited until the group fully realized their mistake. Then, he stepped forward. The staff extended in one smooth motion. A rogue charged him. Edward swung once. The impact didn't look dramatic. But the result was. The attacker launched backward like they had been struck by something far larger than a human. Gone from the fight instantly. Another came from the side. Edward pivoted. One strike. Same result. What are they? They're not normal. The formation broke. Some tried to regroup. Others hesitated. A few started backing away. Too late. Yuki and Edward moved in sync without needing to speak. She handled groups. He handled anything that got too close or too aggressive. Her shield cleared space. Her blade ended threats cleanly. His staff didn't miss. Didn't hesitate. Every strike removed someone from the fight. No wasted motion. No unnecessary brutality. Just absolute efficiency. Within seconds, the 20 became 5. Then 3. Then 1. The leader. He stumbled back, breathing hard. Eyes wide now. What are you? Edward stepped forward calmly. Travelers. A pause. Heading east. The man hesitated. Then ran. He didn't make it far. Yuki stepped in. One clean strike. And it was over. The ruins went quiet again. Like nothing had happened. Yuki exhaled slightly. Well? A pause. That was disappointing. Edward collapsed his staff. They weren't the real problem. She glanced at him. No? He looked toward the deeper ridge. No. Yuki followed his gaze. You think they were running from something? Edward nodded once. Or being pushed. A pause. Same pattern as before. That familiar tension returned. Not fear. But awareness. Final beat. Yuki wiped her blade clean and slid it back into place. The blue glow faded. So? She glanced at him with a slight grin. Still think this was a good idea? Edward looked ahead. Into deeper ruins. Into unknown territory. Definitely. She smirked. Good. A beat. Because I'm enjoying this. And together. They moved forward. The last echoes of combat faded into the still air. The ruins returned to silence as if nothing had happened. Edward stood still for a moment, looking over the fallen rogues. Thinking. Yuki rested her sword on her shoulder, glancing around. They didn't even hesitate, she said. Edward nodded slowly. No. A pause. These guys weren't afraid of anything out here. He looked down at one of the bodies. They weren't running from a threat. Yuki tilted her head slightly. Then why attack us? Edward exhaled. Because we had something they wanted. A beat. And they were going to take it by force. Yuki crossed her arms, looking back toward the direction they came from. Well? A small shrug. At least we took care of some very bad people. She smirked slightly. That town we passed won't have to worry about them anymore. Edward nodded once. I agree. But his attention had already shifted. Forward. Deeper. The terrain changed the further they moved in. More broken. More unnatural. Stone that didn't just collapse, but looked like it had been moved. Yuki slowed. You see that? Edward followed her gaze. A section of rock wall. Too smooth. Too straight. He walked toward it, running a hand across the surface. This isn't natural. A pause. It's covering something. Edward stepped back slightly. Then tapped the surface with the end of his staff. A hollow sound answered. Yuki's ears flicked. That's definitely not rock. Edward nodded. No. He adjusted his grip and applied a controlled strike. Not destructive. Precise. The outer layer cracked, just enough. Stone shifted. Dust fell. And beneath it, a seam. A door. Hidden. Sealed. Old. Yuki stepped closer. That's not creepy at all. Edward gave a faint smirk. You said you wanted interesting. She gave him a look. Not this interesting. He studied the door. No visible handles. No obvious mechanism. Just age. And intent. This was meant to stay hidden. Edward tapped his wrist. Lucy. Active. Deploy 1 drone. Mapping priority. Internal scan if possible. Acknowledged. A small drone launched from his pack, rising with a soft hum. Yuki watched it. Still not used to that. Edward glanced at her. You don't have to be. The drone approached the door, scanning the seams. A faint shift. Then a low, grinding sound. The door moved. Slowly. Dust and age resisting it. Until a narrow opening revealed darkness beyond. Cold air drifted out. Stale. Ancient. Yuki instinctively stepped closer to Edward. That smells like bad decisions. Edward nodded. Usually does. The drone slipped inside first. Its light flickered through the darkness. Lucy's voice returned calmly. Structure detected. Descending passage. Multiple branching paths. Edward's expression sharpened. How deep? Unknown. Signal partially obstructed beyond initial descent. Yuki frowned slightly. So we're going in blind. Edward corrected her. Not blind. A pause. Just not fully informed. She sighed. That's worse. They stood at the entrance. Surface world behind them. Darkness below. Yuki adjusted her grip on her sword. The faint blue edge shimmered softly. All right. A breath. We going in? Edward looked into the darkness. Then nodded. Yeah. Final beat. As they stepped through the doorway. The light from above faded behind them. The air grew colder. Heavier. And somewhere deeper below. Something shifted. Not loud. Not obvious. But enough to be noticed. Yuki glanced sideways at Edward. You feel that? Edward didn't look back. Yeah. A pause. We're not the first ones down here. And together. They descended. The deeper they went, the colder it became. Edward deployed a second drone. It hovered higher than the first, casting a steady white glow down the corridor while the original continued mapping ahead. Between the two, the darkness didn't vanish. It just pulled back slightly. Yuki held a torch in one hand. A flashlight in the other. Backup for both. Just in case. I don't like this place, she muttered. Edward glanced at her. You don't like most places that try to kill us. This one feels like it already did. They walked a little closer together now. Closer than before. Then, without warning, Yuki reached out and grabbed his hand. Firm. Not hesitant. Edward blinked once, looking down briefly. You good? She didn't look at him. It's dark. A pause. And I want to. That second part came quieter. Almost lost. Edward didn't pull away. He simply adjusted his grip slightly. Holding her hand properly now. All right. Yuki's tail flicked once behind her. Satisfied. They moved deeper. Stone turned smoother. Walls more deliberate. Carved. Old. Too old. The drone ahead flickered slightly. Lucy's voice came through. Movement detected. Edward stopped. Where? Ahead. Multiple. Yuki tightened her grip on his hand slightly. Define multiple. A pause. More than 5. It started faint. A scrape. Then another. Bone against stone. Something dragging. Something assembling. Yuki slowly drew her blade. The blue edge flickered to life, casting an eerie glow. That's new, she whispered. Edward extended his staff. Stay close. She didn't need to be told twice. The corridor opened into a wider chamber. The drones drifted forward. Light spreading across the floor. And then, they saw them. Skeletons. Not scattered. Not dead. Standing. Some incomplete. Some broken. But all moving. Pieces snapping into place. Skulls turning. Empty eye sockets locking onto them. Yuki froze for half a second. Nope. A beat. I don't like that. One of the skeletons stepped forward. Jerky. Unnatural. Weapon in hand, rusted, but still sharp. Then another moved. Then 5. Then all of them. No roar. No warning. They just came. Fast. Too fast for something that shouldn't even be alive. Yuki let go of Edward's hand. Only to move forward. Her shield came up. All right. A skeleton lunged. She met it head on. Shield bash. Boom. 5 skeletons exploded backward, bones scattering across stone in a violent wave. Okay, that works. Another rushed her. Her sword moved. Clean. Precise. The glowing edge sliced through bone like it wasn't there. The skeleton collapsed instantly. No resistance. No struggle. Yuki adjusted her stance. These things are easier than they look. Behind her. Bones started moving again. Reassembling. Edward stepped in. Staff extended. One skeleton swung. He struck first. The impact shattered it completely. Pieces scattered across the room. But then, those same pieces twitched, pulling back together. Edward's eyes narrowed. Not normal. More came. Relentless. Breaking wasn't enough. They didn't stop. Didn't hesitate. Didn't fear. Yuki noticed it too. They're not staying down. Edward looked past them. Toward the back of the chamber. Something faint. Something pulsing. There. At the far end. Etched into the stone. A glowing symbol. Faint. But active. Every time a skeleton fell. It pulsed. And the bones moved again. Yuki followed his gaze. Oh, that's definitely the problem. Edward nodded. Agreed. Yuki stepped forward again, blocking another wave. Shield bash. Bones scattered. Go! Edward didn't argue. He moved. Fast. Faster than anything in the room. Staff in hand? Skeletons tried to intercept. They didn't succeed. Every strike cleared his path. He reached the symbol. Didn't hesitate. One swing. Full force. The staff connected. The stone cracked. The glow shattered. And instantly, everything stopped. The skeletons collapsed. Not reassembling this time. Just bones. Dead again. The chamber went still. Yuki exhaled slowly. Okay. A pause. That was officially creepy. Edward collapsed his staff. Yeah. She walked over to him. You okay? He nodded. Yeah. A beat. You. She smirked slightly. I handled worse. Then, without thinking, she reached for his hand again. This time slower. More intentional. Edward didn't hesitate. He took it. Final beat. Yuki glanced around the chamber one more time. So. A small smile returned. Still glad we came east? Edward looked deeper into the ruins, where the darkness continued. Unbroken. Unknown. Definitely. And together, they moved forward again. The silence after the skeletons fell didn't last. It never does. Edward's grip on Yuki's hand loosened, not letting go, just ready. Something's off, he said. Yuki nodded. Yeah. Too easy. Edward tapped the drone controls. Lucy, switch the forward unit to X-ray sweep. Full trap scan. Acknowledged. The light drone pulsed once. A faint grid passed over the walls, floor, and ceiling, revealing what the eye couldn't. Hidden plates. Pressure seams. Old mechanisms buried beneath stone. Edward's eyes narrowed. There are traps here. Yuki smirked slightly. Of course there are. He pointed subtly. Stay to my path. She didn't argue. Lead the way, genius. They moved carefully through the chamber. Step by step. Avoiding pressure points. Passing between ancient mechanisms that hadn't been triggered in centuries. And then, the drone flickered again. Movement detected. Larger mass. Yuki's grip tightened. How much larger? A pause. Significantly. Something moved in the far darkness. Heavy. Deliberate. Then it stepped forward. And the light caught it. 10 feet tall. Part skeleton. Part decayed flesh. Patches of scaled hide still clinging to its frame. A dragonkin corpse. Eyes glowing faintly. Not alive. Not dead. Something in between. A low growl followed. From the side. A second shape emerged. Lean, twisted. A dire wolf, but wrong. Skin torn. Bone visible. Eyes feral, but aware. A ghoul. It circled slowly. Then came the sound neither of them expected. A voice. Dry. Cracking. But clear. Living things. From the back of the chamber, a third figure stepped forward. A skeleton. But not like the others. Its bones glowed faint red. Not bright. Just enough to feel wrong. It tilted its skull slightly. All the living must die. A pause. Then more focused. After interrogation. Yuki blinked once. Oh, great. A beat. This one talks. She glanced at Edward. I'm already annoyed. Edward exhaled slowly. That makes 2 of us. The red-boned skeleton didn't rush. Didn't charge. It studied them. Unregistered entities. Its gaze locked onto Edward. You do not belong. The dragonkin shifted behind it. The wolf lowered its stance. Waiting. Coordinated. Edward's eyes moved quickly. Positions. Distances. Trap layout still active beneath them. 3 enemies. Different roles. They're working together, he said quietly. Yuki nodded. Good. A small grin formed. Makes it more fun. The wolf moved first. Fast. Faster than the skeletons before. It lunged low. Yuki met it head on. Shield slam. But this time, it didn't fly back as far. It twisted mid-impact, landing on its feet. Recovering instantly. Okay, stronger. The massive dragonkin stepped in next. Each movement heavy, deliberate. It swung. Yuki blocked. And felt the difference immediately. That's not normal strength. The impact pushed her back several feet. Boots grinding against stone. Edward stepped in. Staff extended. The dragonkin swung again. Edward met it. One strike. The impact cracked bone and scale. But didn't destroy it. It staggered. Then steadied. Edward's eyes sharpened. Durable. Adapt. The red skeleton lifted one hand slightly. The wolf circled wider. The dragonkin adjusted its stance. Not mindless. Directed. Yuki frowned. I really don't like that one. Edward nodded. Take the wolf. A pause. I'll handle the rest. The ghoul lunged again. Yuki moved with it this time. Not blocking. Cutting. Her blade flashed blue. Clean strike across its side. It recoiled. But didn't fall. She smirked. Good. A beat. I was getting bored. The dragonkin charged. Edward didn't move back. He stepped forward. Staff swung. Full force. The impact shattered part of its rib structure. It dropped to one knee. But didn't stay down. Edward adjusted. Not regenerating. A pause. Just resilient. The red skeleton raised its hand again. Submit for study. Edward didn't respond. He moved. Fast. Straight toward it. The dragonkin tried to intercept. Edward bypassed it. The wolf lunged. Yuki slammed it aside. Go! Edward reached the red skeleton. It raised a blade. Too slow. One strike. The staff connected. The red bones cracked. Then shattered completely. The glow vanished instantly. The dragonkin froze. Then collapsed. The wolf staggered. Then dropped lifeless. No movement. No recovery. Just stillness. Yuki exhaled slowly. Okay. A pause. That was better. Edward collapsed his staff. Yeah. She walked over. Smarter enemies now? He nodded. Definitely. A beat. And that means something put them here. Final beat. Yuki glanced deeper into the ruins. So. A small grin returned. Think it gets worse? Edward looked ahead into the darkness. Unfazed. Focused. Yes. She smiled. Good. And together. They moved forward again. The corridor narrowed as they went deeper. Stone pressed in from all sides, colder than before, as if the ruin itself was tightening its grip. Edward slowed slightly. We're close. Yuki adjusted her grip on her shield. Good. A pause. I want out of this place. He gave a faint glance at her. Noted. At the end of the corridor stood a sealed door. Older than the rest. Carved with fractured symbols that no longer held meaning. Edward looked at the drone. Open it! The light drone moved forward, scanning. Then, the mechanisms inside shifted. A heavy grinding sound echoed through the stone. The door unlocked. And slowly, it opened. Light from the drone spilled inside. And the room revealed itself. Left side. A massive pile of treasure. Gold. Jewels. Silver and gold weapons. Platinum-like metals catching the light in broken reflections. Not stored. Not protected. Hoarded. Right side. Chains. 30 people. Bruised. Weak. Alive. At the far end of the chamber sat the source. A humanoid figure. Ghoulish. Rotting. Wearing a cracked crown and torn royal robes. It sat on a throne made of stone and bone. Its head slowly lifted. And it spoke. A language neither Edward nor Yuki recognized. Ancient. Corrupted. Then it stood. And raised a hand. A fireball formed instantly. Yuki moved without hesitation. She stepped in front of Edward. Back! Shield came up. Boom. The fireball hit the shield and dispersed into sparks of heatless light. The impact pushed her back a step. But she held. Edward's eyes narrowed. Good block. Yuki didn't look away. Yeah. A pause. Don't thank me yet. The undead king raised its hand again. The air shifted. Stone lifted from the ground. A jagged rock shot forward at high speed. Yuki braced. Shield up. Crack. The rock shattered on impact. But a fragment slipped through, striking her face. She recoiled slightly. A thin line of blood formed at her nose. She wiped it once. Okay. A beat. That one was cheap. Something in Edward's expression shifted. Not loud. Not dramatic, but absolute. He stepped forward slightly. Voice lower. Controlled. Yuki is mine. A pause. And you will never touch her again. The chamber went still. Even the undead figure paused. Edward moved. No hesitation. No warning. Staff extended fully in one motion. He crossed the distance in a blur of force and intent. The undead king tried to react. Too late. Edward struck. The impact landed with full force. Enhanced inertia. Perfect transfer. No recoil. No resistance absorbed. Just raw, amplified destruction. The undead king didn't explode. It collapsed inward. Its form breaking apart into collapsing, corrupted matter. Bone. Rot. Magic residue. All reduced to a spreading mass of ruin on the floor. Silence followed immediately. Yuki blinked once. Okay. She glanced at Edward. That was a bit dramatic. Edward exhaled slowly. It was efficient. She smirked faintly. Sure. A pause. You sounded serious, though. Edward didn't answer that directly. He looked toward the chains. Let's get them out. They moved quickly. Yuki cut the chains with her blade, clean, precise strikes. Edward helped stabilize those who couldn't walk. The prisoners were weak. Confused. But alive. One of them spoke shakily. We were just camping. Another nodded. Then the skeletons came. Yuki frowned. They kidnapped you? A weak nod. Edward looked toward the ruins. So this wasn't just a tomb. A pause. It was a hunting ground. Edward opened his dimensional storage device. The horde shifted. Then vanished. Clean transfer. Yuki raised an eyebrow. You're really just taking all that? Edward nodded. It was used to trap people. A pause. It has a purpose now. She smirked slightly. You're getting practical. He glanced at her. You're bleeding. Yuki wiped her nose again. Barely. They guided the survivors out slowly. Step by step. Back through the corridor. Back through the broken halls. Back toward light. The ruins didn't resist anymore. They felt empty now. Like something had finally been removed. Final beat. Outside, fresh air hit them again. The prisoners collapsed slightly in relief. The drone hovered above, scanning the sky. Yuki exhaled deeply. I hate that place. Edward looked back once. It's done. A pause. Then Yuki glanced at him. You said my name in there? Edward blinked. Did I? She nodded. Yeah. A faint smile formed. Don't make a habit of that. He looked away slightly. No promises. And together, they began the walk back to the village. It took most of the morning to reach the survivors' original settlement. It was smaller than the village they had come from earlier, half hidden in a shallow valley, built from rough wood and stone, the kind of place that looked like it had survived by stubbornness more than safety. When the first survivors saw it, they stopped walking. One of them dropped to their knees. We made it back. Another just exhaled, shaking. I thought it was gone. Edward didn't interrupt the moment. Yuki didn't either. There was no grand reward. No celebration. Just reunion. Families collapsing into each other. Names being called out through tears and disbelief. Edward helped where he could, structural checks, clearing debris, stabilizing weak supports. Yuki did what she always did best, stood nearby looking like she wasn't emotional, while clearly making sure nobody got hurt again. At one point, a child ran up and hugged her leg. She froze. Then awkwardly patted their head. Yeah. You're fine. Edward saw it. Didn't comment. But he smiled slightly anyway. By late afternoon, their job was done. No more rogues. No more undead pulling strings in the ruins. Just people going back to a life that had almost been stolen. Edward and Yuki stood at the edge of the settlement as the sun started to lower. Yuki stretched slightly. So that's that. Edward nodded. Yes. A pause. For now. She glanced at him. You don't sound convinced. He looked east. I rarely am. They didn't return to the village immediately. Instead, they camped again outside the settlement that night. Same fire. Same quiet. Different weight. This time it wasn't urgency. It was aftermath. Yuki sat with her knees drawn up slightly, watching the fire. Edward checked equipment out of habit more than necessity. Either of them spoke for a while. Yuki finally broke the silence. That should feel like winning. Edward glanced up. Doesn't it? She thought about it. Kind of. A pause. Just feels like we stopped something that was already happening too long. Edward nodded slowly. That's usually what most victories are. That made her quiet again. The fire popped softly. Yuki shifted a little closer without acknowledging it. Edward noticed, but didn't react outwardly. Not anymore. That silence between them had changed over time. Less distance. More awareness. Yuki poked the fire lightly with a stick. You said something back there. Edward already knew what she meant. In the ruins. She nodded. Yeah. A pause stretched out. Then she added. You didn't take it back. Edward exhaled slowly. No. Yuki didn't look at him directly now. You're really bad at saying things normally. Edward gave a faint, tired smirk. I've been told. She shifted slightly. Closer again. Try anyway. That wasn't a joke. Edward looked at the fire. Then at her. I don't want you to get hurt. Yuki rolled her eyes slightly. That's not new. He nodded. I know. A pause. It's just becoming harder to ignore how much that matters to me. That made her stop moving entirely for a moment. Yuki finally looked at him. That sounds like something more than concern. Edward didn't dodge it. It is. A pause. Then quieter. I care about you more than I should. The fire seemed louder in the silence that followed. Yuki stared at him for a long moment. Then leaned back slightly, exhaling. That's a dangerous thing to say out loud. Edward nodded. Yes. A beat. It is. Yuki's ears flicked once. Then she smirked faintly. Good. Edward blinked. Good? She looked at him. Means I'm not imagining it. Either of them pushed further. Not tonight. But the distance between them didn't return either. It simply stopped shrinking. For now, that was enough. The fire burned lower as night deepened. Yuki stretched slightly. So what now? Edward looked east. The same direction he always looked when things were uncertain. We continue. She tilted her head. Still chasing trouble? He shook his head. Not chasing. A pause. Just moving forward. Yuki smirked. East again? Edward nodded once. East. She sighed lightly. But stood anyway. Fine. A beat. But if we find more skeleton kings, I'm blaming you. Edward gave a faint smile. Fair. Final beat. They packed the camp quietly. No rush. No urgency. Just movement. As the stars came out above them again, the world ahead stayed unknown. But this time, they didn't feel like strangers moving through it alone. And in the morning, they went east. The road eventually widened into something different. Not ruins. Not wilderness. A city. It rose from the landscape in layered cobblestone streets, and timber-framed buildings reinforced with stone. Smoke curled from chimneys. Markets filled the lower streets. People moved with purpose instead of survival. Edward slowed slightly as they entered. Yuki looked around. Okay. A pause. This is actually impressive. Edward nodded once. Population estimate, around 4,000. Yuki blinked. That's a lot of people. He glanced at her. For this region. Yes. They stood out. Not because they were loud. But because they weren't. A man in black reinforced armor. A fox-herd warrior in silver-gold trimmed gear. and two mechanical horses waiting calmly behind them. People noticed. People always noticed. But no one stopped them. Not yet. The inn sat near the central road. Wooden structure. Warm light spilling through the windows. A sign swinging slightly in the breeze. Edward pushed the door open. Warm air hit them immediately. Conversation. Food. Life. Yuki exhaled slightly. I forgot what normal noise sounds like. Edward nodded. Same. The innkeeper glanced at them. Room for the night? Edward nodded. 2 nights. A pause. 1 room available. Yuki tilted her head slightly. How many beds? The innkeeper shrugged. 1. Silence. Edward spoke first. We'll take it. Yuki looked at him. You're fast deciding that. He shrugged slightly. Standing outside will not improve conditions. She sighed. Fair. Upstairs, the room was simple. Small bed. Hard wooden floor. Dim lantern light. Yuki looked at the floor. Yeah. No. Edward nodded. Agreed. She crossed her arms. The floor looks like it wants to break my spine. He glanced down. Confirmed. A pause. They both spoke at the same time. We'll share the bed. Then immediately. Because the floor is unacceptable. A beat. Neither looked at the other. They kept space at first. Intentional distance. Respectful. Careful. But sleep has its own opinions. At some point, exhaustion won. The city outside quieted. The lantern dimmed. And the world narrowed to one room. Sunlight crept through the window. Warm. Soft. Yuki woke first. She didn't move immediately. Because she noticed something. Edward's arm was around her waist. Her back rested against his chest. His breathing steady behind her. His head slightly buried in her hair. Yuki stayed still. Oh. A pause. She looked down at his hand. Resting comfortably. Not tight. Just there. Familiar. She should have moved. She didn't. Instead, a small smile formed. Yuki shifted slightly, careful not to wake him yet. Her hand slowly covered his. Warm. Quiet. You said I was yours. A pause. Her voice lowered even more. So I guess that makes you mine too? She closed her eyes again. And waited. A few moments later, Edward stirred. He noticed immediately. Position. Contact. Her hand over his. His arm around her. He didn't move right away. Just processed. Then finally. Yuki. She didn't turn yet. Just hummed softly. Morning. Final beat. Silence. Not awkward. Not tense. Just different. Edward didn't pull away. Yuki didn't either. Outside, the city of 4,000 continued its morning like any other. Inside the room, nothing was normal anymore. And neither of them said what came next. Not yet. Breakfast in the inn was simple, but good. Eggs sizzling in warm spice oil. Something close enough to bacon that Edward didn't bother asking what animal it came from. A bright fruit juice that tasted like mixed berries and citrus. Yuki leaned back slightly after her first sip. Okay. A pause. This city knows what it's doing with food. Edward nodded once. Agreed. For a moment, it almost felt normal. Outside, the streets were alive. Cobblestone roads. Wood and stone buildings. Vendors calling out prices. Humanoids of all kinds moving through the market, vulpine, lupin, feline, human, and others. Edward adjusted his pace beside Yuki. We should secure supplies while we're here. Yuki nodded. And gifts. He glanced at her. Gifts? She shrugged. My parents. A small pause. Feels right. Edward gave a faint nod. Agreed. They stopped at a jeweler first. The shop was quiet, polished, and warm with lantern light even during the day. Yuki looked around carefully. Then stopped at a comb. Gold. Set with ruby and emerald stones. Simple, but elegant. That one. Edward looked over it. For your mother? She nodded. Lucy's voice came softly from Edward's device. Material analysis, real gold. Genuine gemstones. High craftsmanship. Edward nodded once. It is authentic. Yuki didn't hesitate. Then I'm taking it. While Yuki was distracted paying, Edward's attention shifted. Another display. Rings. Matching set. Gold bands with intricate engraving. The man's ring simple but detailed. The woman's ring identical, but with a single diamond set into it. He stared at them longer than he meant to. Yuki noticed. What? Edward blinked. Nothing. A pause. Then calmly. Step outside. I will join you shortly. She narrowed her eyes slightly. That's suspicious. He gave a neutral look. It is not. Yuki sighed. Fine. Hurry up. And walked out. Edward stood there for a moment longer. Then spoke quietly. Lucy. Purchase. Confirmed. The rings were secured. No further explanation given. No further thoughts spoken aloud. Next stop, tailor. Yuki found a dress immediately. Azure fabric. Like daylight sky. Light blue beadwork along the edges that caught the light with every movement. This is perfect. Edward observed it. For your mother. Yuki nodded. Yeah. He added nothing more. He simply approved. For her father, they chose sturdy travel clothes, practical, reinforced, well-made. No ceremony. Just respect. They ate again in the city square. Warm bread. Meat stew. Fresh fruit. The city felt calm. Busy but safe. For now. Then it changed. A deep bell rang out across the city. Once. Twice. Then again, urgent. People stopped moving. Heads turned upward. A man on a tower shouted, Orcs inbound! The words cut through the market like a blade. Yuki stood immediately. That's not good. A nearby citizen answered her before she could ask. We've had an orc problem for 5 years. Another voice shouted from somewhere. How many? The answer came back. About 100. A pause. Then, we only have 35 town guard. Yuki slowly turned her head toward Edward. That sounds like a problem. Edward nodded once. Yes. Edward looked toward the gate. Then toward the direction of incoming movement. We help. Yuki smirked slightly. I was hoping you'd say that. Edward raised his hand slightly. Lucy. Ready. Drones launched. 2 moved forward toward the walls. 1 took overwatch position above the gate. 1 stayed behind Edward and Yuki. Combat roles assigned. Edward spoke calmly. Protect civilians. Support guards. Neutralize threats attempting wall breach. Acknowledged. Yuki rolled her shoulders. Finally. Something simple. Edward glanced at her. Simple? She grinned. Hit things until they stop moving. A pause. Edward nodded. Fair assessment. Final beat. The city below them shifted from marketplace calm to defensive chaos in minutes. Guards moved. Arrows were prepared. Gate mechanisms engaged. And beyond the walls, dust rose in the distance. A moving mass. Approaching. Yuki lifted her blades slightly. Let's see if this city survives its orc problem. Edward's staff extended with a soft mechanical click. It will. And together, they stepped toward the gate. The orcs hit the outskirts like a wave that forgot how to stop. Not organized like the undead in the ruins. Not disciplined like soldiers. Just momentum, rage, and numbers. But the city wasn't empty. And it wasn't helpless. Edward stood on the inner side of the gate with Yuki beside him. 35 guards, Yuki said quietly. Against 100. Edward nodded once. Then we improved their odds. The first clash came at the outer barricades. Town guards fired in coordinated volleys, arrows and bolts striking into the front ranks of the orcs. The drones moved immediately. One hovered above the wall, scanning and marking targets. Another swept low, disrupting climbing attempts with precise non-lethal impacts that knocked attackers clean off ladders and scaffolds. A third stayed near Edward and Yuki, relaying movement patterns. Lucy's voice came through calmly. Enemy coordination, low. Attack patterns repetitive. Weak flank formation detected east side. Edward responded immediately. Mark it. Yuki didn't wait for permission. She vaulted onto the wall edge and dropped into the breach point where orcs were trying to push through. Her shield slammed forward. Boom. 3 orcs were thrown back instantly. Her blade followed, clean, efficient strikes that ended the threat before it escalated. This is easier than the ruins, she muttered. An orc tried to flank her. She didn't even turn fully. Shield swing. It was gone. Edward moved along the inner wall where pressure was highest. Not charging in recklessly. Positioning. Controlling. His staff extended and collapsed in controlled bursts of force, each strike precise enough to remove threats without destabilizing the defenders. One guard staggered under impact from an orc axe. Edward stepped in instantly. Staff intercepted the follow-up strike and redirected it into empty air. Stay in formation, Edward said calmly. The guard blinked at him. Yes, yes, sir. The tide began to change quickly. The drones marked targets too fast for human reaction time. Guard volleys became more accurate. Orc formations collapsed under coordinated pressure. One drone tracked climbing attempts and intercepted them before they reached the wall. Another provided overwatch for Yuki, highlighting incoming threats. The third stayed near Edward, ensuring no blindside attacks reached him or the guards. Within minutes, the orcs were no longer advancing. They were just trying to survive. The battle didn't last long. It lasted 30 minutes. But it felt even shorter once momentum broke. Yuki moved like a storm contained within steel and shield. Edward moved like a constant correction to chaos. The guards, no longer overwhelmed, found rhythm. Formation held. Defenses stabilized. Attacks became organized instead of desperate. And the orcs began to fall back. A final coordinated push from the guards, supported by drone marking, collapsed the orc advance completely. What remained turned and fled into the outer fields. No pursuit was needed. Edward raised a hand. Hold position. The guards stopped immediately. Breathing hard. Alive. Mostly uninjured. The gate area was a mess of dust, broken weapons, and scattered armor pieces. But the wall still stood. The city still stood. No civilians had been touched. Yuki stepped down from the wall, rolling her shoulder slightly. That was it? Edward nodded. Yes. A pause. Efficient. She smirked faintly. I was hoping for more. He glanced at her. That is a good problem to have. Edward didn't rest. He moved immediately to the injured guards. Most were minor wounds, bruises, shallow cuts, strain injuries. Nothing catastrophic. Still, they needed attention. Edward opened his portable medical kit systems and directed drone assistance for basic stabilization and scanning. Sit, he said to one guard. The man obeyed instantly. Yuki watched him for a moment. You're switching modes again. Edward didn't look up. This is normal. She leaned slightly against a nearby post. You're weirdly good at it. A pause. Thanks. After a moment, Yuki walked over and crouched beside him. What do you need? Edward handed her a simple wrapped bandage pack. Pressure support here. Keep them steady. She blinked. You're giving me medical instructions? He nodded. You learn quickly. Yuki smirked. I learn everything quickly. And for once, she followed directions without complaint. By the time the sun began to lower, the battlefield was quiet. The guards were treated. No fatalities. No civilians harmed. The city was intact. The gates still stood. A victory, Not dramatic. But complete. Final beat. Yuki leaned back slightly, watching Edward finish checking the last injured guard. So that's it then? Edward nodded once. Yes. A pause. This city is safe. She exhaled slowly. Good. Then glanced toward the horizon. So what now? Edward didn't hesitate. He never did for long. We continue east. Yuki smirked faintly. Of course we do. And this time, neither of them sounded surprised. The inn was louder than the night outside. Laughter downstairs. Clinking cups. People talking like the world wasn't constantly trying to kill them. Edward and Yuki sat near the back of the common room, eating dinner. Nothing fancy this time. Just food. Just rest. Yuki leaned back slightly. So. Edward looked up. So. A pause. She smirked faintly. We're still going east tomorrow. Edward nodded. Yes. Yuki sighed. Of course we are. There was a moment where either of them added anything. That was new. Not silence from exhaustion. Silence from awareness. Yuki poked her food lightly. You ever think about stopping? Edward answered immediately. No. A beat. Then softer. Not really. Yuki glanced at him. Me either. Then she added more quietly. I just didn't think it would feel like this. Edward didn't ask what she meant. He already knew. Later that night. Same room. Same inn. Same single bed. Yuki stared at it. They're doing this on purpose. Edward checked the floor. The floor is still unacceptable. She pointed at it. It looks angrier than last time. A pause. Then both of them, almost in sync. Bet it is. Neither of them looked at the other for a second after saying it. They lay down carefully at first. Backs to each other. Space between them. Intentional. Controlled. But sleep didn't respect plans. At some point, the distance disappeared. Yuki shifted slightly. Edward adjusted without waking fully. And eventually, the space between them stopped existing at all. Sunlight crept in. Warm again. Familiar again. Yuki woke first. And immediately noticed Edward's arm around her. Her back against his chest. No tension. No hesitation. Just comfort. She stayed still. Longer than last time. Yuki didn't move away. Instead, she looked down at his hand resting near her waist. Then quietly. You're really bad at keeping distance. A pause. A faint smile formed. Not that I'm complaining. She hesitated. Then added, even quieter. I like this. Edward stirred behind her. Not startled. Just aware. Yuki. She hummed softly. Morning. He didn't move immediately. Neither did she. The moment lingered. Too long to pretend it was accidental now. Yuki finally spoke again. Still facing forward. You said something in the ruins? Edward blinked once. Yes. A pause. She didn't tease this time. You said I was yours. Silence followed. Then Edward answered honestly. I did. Yuki exhaled softly. That wasn't just heat of the moment, was it? Edward didn't avoid it. No. A pause. It wasn't. Yuki's hand slowly moved, covering his where it rested. Not pulling away. Holding it there. Then say it properly. Edward hesitated. Just for a second. Then. I care about you. A pause. More than I should be comfortable admitting. Yuki closed her eyes briefly. That's still not enough. Edward's grip tightened slightly, but gently. Then what is? Yuki turned just slightly in his arms. Not fully facing him yet. Just enough. Look at me when you say it. Edward did. No hesitation now. She met his eyes. And this time, he didn't filter it. I care about you, he said again. And I don't want to lose you. That landed. Quietly. Completely. Yuki didn't respond with words. She just moved. Slow. Intentional. Closing the distance he had never fully bridged himself. Her forehead brushed his for a moment. Then, a kiss. Soft. Brief. Not rushed. Not uncertain. Just real. She pulled back just slightly. Not far. Still close enough to feel his breath. About time, she murmured. Edward blinked once. Then very faintly. Was I late? Yuki smirked. A little. A pause. Then softer. But I'll forgive you. Final beat. They didn't move apart. Not immediately. Not even after the moment passed. Outside, the city continued its normal morning life. Inside the room, two people who had survived monsters, ruins, and war finally stopped pretending nothing had changed. And for the first time since the wormhole, the journey didn't feel like survival. It felt shared. The city faded behind them. Yuki adjusted her seat on the mechanical horse as it lifted smoothly into the air. Wind rushed past. Clouds parted. So, she said, glancing sideways, we're really doing this? Edward nodded. Yes. A pause. We go home. Yuki smiled. Not teasing this time. Just happy. Good. They flew fast. Faster than before. Not chasing danger. Not exploring. Returning. The land below blurred into green and stone and rivers as the distance closed. Yuki leaned slightly closer to him mid-flight. You're quiet. Edward glanced at her. Thinking. She smirked. That's always dangerous. He didn't deny it. The village came into view. Stronger now. Stone walls reinforced. Gates secured. Life moving within safely. When they landed, people noticed immediately. Then recognized them. And everything shifted. Voices rose. Cheers followed. Relief. Pride. Excitement. They weren't just travelers anymore. They were the ones who came back. Yuki didn't stop. She moved straight through the crowd. Edward followed. Ven and Trixie stood near the center, already stepping forward. Yuki didn't say anything. She just closed the distance and hugged them both tightly. I miss you, she said softly. Trixie held her close. You've been busy. Ven smiled, steady and proud. You came back stronger. Edward stopped a respectful distance away. Watching. Waiting. Yuki pulled back and reached into her pack. I brought you something. She handed Trixie the golden comb. Ruby and emerald catching the light. Trixie's eyes widened slightly. Yuki. Her voice softened. This is beautiful. Yuki smiled. It reminded me of you. Then she turned to Ven and handed him the clothing set. For you. Ven examined it, then nodded once. Practical. A pause. Then a faint smile. I like it. Yuki stepped back. I'm going to go find the elders. I got them something too. She glanced briefly at Edward. Don't go anywhere. Edward nodded. I won't. She left. And the moment shifted. Silence lingered for a second. Then Ven spoke. You have something to say. Not a question. Edward nodded. Yes. He reached into his storage. And brought out the rings. He held them out. Simple. Clear. No hesitation. Trixie's expression softened immediately. Ven studied them carefully. Then looked back at Edward. You are serious. Edward met his gaze. Yes. Edward didn't overcomplicate it. I want your blessing. A pause. To marry Yuki. Silence followed. Not tense. But heavy with meaning. Trixie looked at Ven. Ven looked at Edward. Measured. Calm. You protect her. Edward answered without hesitation. Always. Ven nodded once. Then asked the question that mattered most. And when you cannot? Edward didn't flinch. Then I stand with her anyway. That was the right answer. Trixie smiled first. Warm. Certain. You already have my blessing. Then took a moment longer. Then nodded. You have mine as well. A pause. Don't make me regret it. Edward gave a faint, respectful nod. I won't. Yuki came back a few minutes later. Okay, what did I miss? Trixie smiled. Everything important. Yuki narrowed her eyes slightly. That sounds suspicious. Edward just looked at her. Calm. Steady. We'll talk soon. Her ears flicked. Oh, okay. It didn't take long for word to spread. By evening, the entire village gathered. Tables set. Food prepared. Firelight dancing across stone walls. Music rising. Laughter returning. This wasn't just a celebration. It was a declaration. Edward stood beside Yuki at the center. The crowd quieted naturally. No formal script. No royal tradition. Just truth. He turned to her. I was going to wait. A pause. But I don't see a reason to anymore. Yuki blinked. Wait. Edward took out the rings. And dropped to one knee. Yuki Frostdale. The entire village held its breath. Will you marry me? Silence. One heartbeat. Two. Then. Yuki laughed softly. Not mocking. Not surprised. Just overwhelmed. You're really doing this in front of everyone? Edward nodded. Yes. She shook her head slightly. Smiling. Eyes bright. Good. A pause. Because my answer is yes. He stood. Placed the ring on her finger. She didn't wait. She pulled him in. And kissed him. Not brief this time. Not uncertain. The crowd erupted around them. Food flowed. Music rose. People gathered around them, laughing, hugging, celebrating. Then clapped Edward on the shoulder. Trixie hugged Yuki tightly again. For once, there was no danger. No urgency. Just joy. Later that night, back at the ship, Edward walked Yuki through it again. This is your home now. She looked around. Then at him. Our home. He nodded. Yes. He gestured down one of the halls. I prepared rooms. A pause. For your parents. When they visit. Yuki blinked. Then smiled softly. You really thought this through. Edward gave a faint smirk. I try. Later, as things settled. Ven asked. Are you two taking a break from adventuring? Edward glanced at Yuki. Then back. For a little while. Yuki leaned lightly against him. Just a little. Final beat. Outside, the village slept peacefully. Inside the ship, a new life had begun. Not the end of the journey. Just a different kind of beginning. And this time, they wouldn't be walking it alone. For 7 days. No one saw them. Not in the village. Not near the gates. Not at the training grounds. Even the mechanical horses remained still. At first, people wondered. Then they remembered. Oh. Right. Honeymoon. And just like that. No one asked any more questions. The Vulpecula had never felt quieter. Not empty. Just private. Sunlight filtered through the viewing panels. The world outside distant. For once, Edward wasn't building something. Wasn't preparing for a fight. Wasn't solving a problem. He was sitting. Relaxed. And that alone felt strange. Yuki lay across the couch, half-curled, tail flicking lazily. You know, she said, staring at the ceiling. This might be my favorite part of everything. Edward glanced at her. Not the dragon? She smirked. No. A pause. This. He nodded. Agreed. There was no armor. No weapons within reach. No urgency. Just two people learning what peace actually meant. Yuki stretched slightly, then rolled onto her side to face him. You're still being careful. Edward raised an eyebrow. Careful? She pointed at him. Yeah. Like I'm going to disappear if you move wrong. He didn't deny it. Old habit. Yuki softened slightly. You can relax, you know. A pause. I'm not going anywhere. There was a moment of quiet. Then Yuki spoke again, more softly this time. Hey. Edward looked at her. Yes? She hesitated. Which was rare. I never told you something. He waited. Yuki looked away for a second. Then back at him. You're the first. Edward blinked. First? She nodded slightly. First person I ever kissed. A small pause. Just wanted you to know. Edward didn't laugh. Didn't tease. Didn't brush it off. He just looked at her. Really looked. I'm glad it was me. Simple. Honest. Exactly what she needed. Yuki's ears flicked slightly. Then she smirked again to cover it. Good answer. A pause. Then she shifted closer. You would have had a problem if you said anything else. Edward gave a faint smile. Noted. Time passed differently after that. Not measured in battles. Or distance. But in moments. Shared meals. Quiet conversations. Light teasing. Learning each other without pressure. Yuki stealing space at his side more often. Edward not pretending to mind anymore. One morning, Yuki sat quietly at the edge of the bed. Thinking. Edward noticed immediately. Something on your mind? She looked back at him. Not teasing. Not joking. Just thoughtful. Yeah. A pause. I think everything's changing. Edward sat up slightly. How so? She placed a hand lightly over her stomach. Not dramatic. Just instinctive. I think we're not going to be just us anymore. Edward didn't speak immediately. Not because he didn't understand. But because he did. Completely. Are you sure? Yuki gave a small smile. No. A pause. But I feel it. That was enough. Edward moved closer. Not rushed. Not panicked. Just present. His hand rested gently over hers. Then we'll figure it out. No fear in his voice. No doubt. Just certainty. Yuki looked at him. Really looked. Then smiled, soft, genuine, a little emotional. Yeah. A pause. We will. Final beat. Outside, the world remained the same. Monsters still existed. Unknown lands still waited. Adventure still called. But inside the ship, something new had started. Not a mission. Not a battle. A family. And for the first time, the future wasn't just something to explore. It was something to build. Together. Edward didn't guess. He verified. Lucy. Yes, Edward. Schedule a medical check. AI doc is ready. The med bay lights came alive as they entered. Clean. Quiet. Controlled. Yuki sat on the edge of the diagnostic bed, arms crossed loosely. You're taking this very seriously. Edward didn't look away from the interface. Yes. She smirked faintly. Good. The android stepped forward, calm and neutral. Initiating scan. Soft light passed over Yuki. A few seconds of silence. Then, confirmation, early stage pregnancy. Yuki exhaled slowly. Not surprised. Just, real now. Edward stood still. Vitals stable. No complications detected. A pause. Recommendation, monthly monitoring to ensure optimal development. Edward nodded immediately. Approved. Yuki looked at him. Monthly, huh? AI Doc responded. Yes. Both maternal and fetal health will be prioritized. Yuki smiled slightly. Guess we're doing this. Edward looked at her. Yes. They didn't wait long. That same day, they went to the village. Yuki walked ahead at first. Then slowed slightly. Okay. A pause. You say it. Edward glanced at her. You are the daughter. She shook her head quickly. Nope. You're the one who's about to get judged. He considered that. Fair. Ven and Trixie were outside their home when they arrived. Trixie smiled immediately. Back already? Yuki nodded. Yeah. A pause. We have something to tell you. Ven crossed his arms slightly. That tone usually means something big. Edward stepped forward. Direct. Clear. Yuki is pregnant. Silence. Trixie's hands went to her mouth. Then, she smiled. Wide. Bright. Oh. A step forward. Then she hugged Yuki tightly. Oh, that's wonderful. Yuki laughed softly. Yeah. I think so too. Then didn't move immediately. He looked at Edward. Then at Yuki. Then back at Edward. Long pause. You move fast. Edward didn't flinch. Yes. Another pause. Then Ben nodded slowly. Good. That caught Yuki off guard. That's it. Then looked at her. You chose well. Then looked back at Edward. Now you just have more to protect. Edward met his gaze. I know. Trixie pulled back from Yuki, still smiling. I'm going to be a grandmother. Yuki grinned. Yeah. Trixie turned to Edward. You're not allowed to let anything happen to them. Edward answered immediately. I won't. Ven added. You better not. Yuki rolled her eyes. Wow. No pressure. They didn't plan to announce it. The village did that for them. By evening, everyone knew. And the reaction? Immediate. People gathered again. Not like a ceremony. More natural. More personal. Congratulations. Laughter. Warmth. One of the elders stepped forward. A new life, after everything we've survived. Another nodded. That's worth celebrating. Yuki leaned slightly into Edward. They're doing it again. Edward glanced at her. Yes. A pause. They are. This time, the attention felt different. Not just respect. Not just gratitude. Something deeper. They weren't just protectors now. They were part of the future. Later that night, back on the ship, Yuki stretched slightly. You've been quiet again. Edward was already moving. Checking systems. Running diagnostics. Adjusting security protocols. Edward? He paused. Then answered honestly. Risk variables have changed. She raised an eyebrow. You mean I'm pregnant? Yes. A pause. That increases priority levels. Yuki stood and walked over. Hey. He looked at her. She placed a hand on his chest. I'm still me. He nodded. I know. A pause. I'm just adjusting. Yuki smiled softly. Good. Then added. Just don't turn into a walking fortress that won't let me move. Edward gave a faint smirk. I will try. She laughed. Try harder. He rested his hand gently over hers. We will protect this. Not just a statement. A promise. Yuki nodded. Together. Final beat. Outside. The village slept peacefully. Inside. The ship stood quiet and watchful. For the first time, Edward wasn't just thinking about survival. Or adventure. He was thinking about what comes after. And this time, he wasn't preparing for a fight. He was preparing for a future. The clearing outside the ship had become their training ground again. But it was different now. Yuki stood with her sword in hand, rolling her shoulders. Okay, don't go easy on me. Edward looked at her. Then at her stomach. Then back at her. I am going easy on you. She frowned. Rude. He extended his staff anyway. Adjusted difficulty. Yuki smirked. Better. Their sparring was lighter now. Controlled. Measured. Yuki still moved fast, sharp, precise, playful. But Edward watched more than he struck. Every step. Every shift. Every breath. Yuki noticed. Of course she did. After a clean block, she stepped back. You're watching me like I'm made of glass. Edward shook his head. No. A pause. Like you matter? That stopped her for a second. Then she smiled. Good answer. Training wasn't just fighting anymore. It became everything else. Yuki trying to cook in the ship's kitchen. Why is it smoking? Edward calmly adjusting settings. Because you increased heat output by 300%. I wanted it faster. You achieved that. She glared. Then laughed. Nights became slower. Softer. Yuki leaned against him more often now. No hesitation. No teasing excuse. Just comfort. Edward didn't question it anymore. He simply stayed. One evening. The sun dipping low. They sat outside the ship. Quiet. Still. Yuki rested against him, her hand gently over her stomach. Edward's hand moved over hers. Careful. Present. He spoke first. Low. Honest. You love me enough to give me a child. Yuki didn't look up right away. She just smiled softly. And you love me enough. A pause. She turned her head slightly toward him. To give me the child I always wanted. That landed deep. No humor. No teasing. Just truth. Edward's hand tightened slightly over hers. Not tense. Just certain. I love you, Yuki. She didn't hesitate this time. I love you too, Edward. Together. They both placed their hands over her stomach. A shared motion. Natural. Instinctive. We love you, baby. The wind moved softly around them. And for a moment, the world felt still. The day came quietly. No warning beyond what they expected. Yuki leaned slightly against the doorway inside the ship. Okay. Edward was there instantly. It's time. She nodded. Yeah. I think it is. Medbay ready. AI dock activated immediately. Preparation complete. Lights softened. Systems engaged. Everything controlled. Everything ready. Edward stayed at her side. Didn't move. Didn't leave. Yuki gripped his hand. Hard. Don't you dare let go. Edward met her eyes. I won't. Time stretched. Moments blurred. But through it all, he stayed. AI Doc's voice remained calm. Progress is stable. Continue. Yuki exhaled sharply. This is harder than fighting a dragon. Edward gave the faintest hint of a smile. You are doing better. She shot him a look. You're lucky I love you. Then, a sound. Small. New. Crying. Alive. The room changed instantly. AI Doc spoke. Healthy infant. Stable. Yuki exhaled. Relief flooding through her. Edward didn't move. Not at first. Just listened. The child was placed gently in Yuki's arms. She looked down. Eyes soft. Hi. Edward stepped closer. Slowly. Carefully. Like approaching something sacred. He looked at the child. Really looked. And for the first time, the man who faced monsters without hesitation was quiet. Yuki glanced at him. You okay? He nodded slowly. Yes. A pause. Better than okay. He placed his hand gently over both of them. Yuki leaned into him. Exhausted. Happy. Complete. We did it. Edward nodded. Yes. Final beat. Outside. The world remained vast. Unknown. Full of danger. But inside the ship, something stronger had been created. Not a weapon. Not a defense. A family. And this time, Edward wasn't preparing to protect a village. Or a world. He was preparing to protect them. And nothing in any world would stand in his way. The room was quiet. Yuki held the child gently, her tail curled protectively around him. Edward stood beside her. Watching. Learning. Becoming something new. Yuki looked up at him. We should name him. Edward nodded. Yes. A pause. Then he spoke carefully. Eric. Yuki tilted her head slightly. Your father. He nodded. Yes. She smiled softly. Then. Edward blinked once. Your father. Yuki nodded. Yes. A pause. They both looked down at the child. Eric Van Gray. The name settled. It felt right. Days passed. Then weeks. And something became clear. Eric wasn't growing normally. He was growing faster. Not unnatural. Not unstable. Just accelerated. His small hands gripped tighter than expected. His eyes tracked movement early. And then, Yuki smiled one morning. Edward. He looked over. She gently moved a small blanket aside. Look. Fox ears. Small. Soft. Perfectly formed. Dark brown fur. With natural streaks of snow white running through them like frost. Edward stared for a moment. Not human. Yuki smiled. Not just vulpine either. A small tail flicked slightly behind him. Same coloring. Same pattern. Edward exhaled slowly. He is both. Yuki nodded. Yeah. One afternoon, Edward placed a small metal tool beside Eric. Mostly as a curiosity. Eric grabbed it. And didn't let go. Edward raised an eyebrow. Grip strength is above expected range. Yuki laughed. He's your kid. A pause. Poor world. They didn't wait long. Yuki stood outside her parents' home, holding Eric carefully. Edward stood beside her. Ready? He asked. Yuki nodded. Yeah. She stepped inside. Trixie turned first. You're back. Then she saw the child. Her voice stopped. Oh. Yuki stepped closer. Mom. Dad. A pause. This is Eric. Then softly. Eric Van Gray. Then froze. Completely. His eyes moved from the child. To Yuki. To Edward. Then back again. You named him, after me? Yuki smiled. Both of you. Then didn't speak. Didn't move. Then, his shoulders dropped slightly. His eyes softened. And for a man who rarely showed it, they filled. He exhaled once. That is an honor. His voice wasn't steady. Trixie stepped forward, hands trembling slightly. Can I? Yuki nodded immediately. Of course. She placed Eric gently into her arms. Trixie held him close. And tears fell instantly. He's beautiful. She smiled through them. Look at him. Then stepped forward slower. Careful. Measured. Like approaching something fragile. Trixie handed Eric to him. For a moment. Then didn't breathe. Then he held the child close. Strong hands. Gentle grip. Eric Van Gray. A pause. You will be strong. His voice steadied. And you will be protected. Edward watched that closely. And nodded once. Agreement. Later. Back at the ship. Edward stood in the main hall. Still. Thinking. Lucy spoke softly. You are running security simulations again. Yes. Threat probability remains low. Edward didn't stop. Probability is not certainty. Yuki leaned against the doorway, holding Eric. You're doing it again. Edward paused. Adjusting. She smirked slightly. You're building a fortress. He didn't deny it. Yes. Edward stepped closer. Looked at both of them. His voice calm. But absolute. Nothing touches you. Not dramatic. Not loud. Just final. Yuki softened. We know. She stepped closer and placed Eric gently in his arms. Edward stiffened slightly. Then relaxed. Carefully holding his son. Yuki smiled. You don't have to fight everything. A pause. Some things you just hold. Edward looked down at Eric. Small. Strong. Alive. Then nodded slowly. Understood. Final beat. Eric's small hand wrapped around Edward's finger. Tight. Unyielding. Yuki leaned against his side. He's going to be something special. Edward looked down at his son. Then at her. He already is. Outside. The world still held danger. Still held unknowns. Still held threats. But now, those threats had something new to face. Not just a warrior. Not just a protector. But a father. And that was far more dangerous. Thank you for listening. Part 3 coming soon. Please consider giving a like and subscribing if you liked the story.